Good afternoon. My name is Steve Peters, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Local History on All View 8. Today's date is March 19th, 1992. Today my guest is going to be Mr. Ross Galloway. Ross is the only boxer from the city of St. Thomas who is in the Canadian Boxing Hall of Fame. Boxing was once a very popular sport in St. Thomas. In the past, we are reputed to have had a world champion back in the 1840s, a gentleman by the name of Charles Freeman, who hailed from St. Thomas, and we don't know much about Mr. Freeman. But 60 years ago, boxing was a very popular local sport and a very popular local attraction. And ring history was made on more than one occasion in the city, and many former local fighters brought fame to the city of St. Thomas. And during the late 1920s and early 1930s, we were known as the Championship City. The boxers spent a great deal of time and effort in their boxing trade, often traveling 5 hours to Toronto and fighting 3 bouts a night. Some of the famous local names that we've had over the years, Cy Pook, who in 1923 won the Canadian light heavyweight title. In 1924, he was the Canadian amateur heavyweight champion, and he later turned pro. Vince Barry, a former mayor, was known as the Patent Leather Kid, who was a very unorthodox fighter. In 1933, he won the Ontario welterweight crown. Peter Lang, a former mayor and alderman, was a boxer, although he was more well known for his feats as a wrestler. But as a boxer, he was never knocked off his feet. Jim Melville, who very coincidentally enough, his grandson is operating one of our cameras today. Jim Melville in 1929 was the Ontario light heavyweight champion, known as a very hard hitter. Some of the another famous local fighter, Chuck Woolley, who was the 1927 welterweight champion, who fought over 200 fights and was later a promoter, and even brought into the city a gentleman by the name of Walker Smith. Walker Smith might not be very well known to people, but he later changed his name to Sugar Ray Robinson. Robinson was here as a 17-year-old and knocked out a local fighter named Bern Brown. Some of the other well-known St. Thomas fighters we've had over the years include William Bumps Wright, Clarence Bus Woolley, Orville Smiley Gardner, Orville Mason, Perry Pebbs Herbert, Jack Lefty Jordan, Len Snowball Langley, Flash Forbes, George College, Tommy Gagan, George and Len Neal, and Bus Laux. We have as you can tell, we have a very long tradition of boxing history in St. Thomas, and I think it's very appropriate that today we have the opportunity to talk to Ross Galloway. Ross was born in Toronto in 1910 and moved to St. Thomas in 1914. He attended Scott Street School and spent 2 years in the general course at CCI. And in 1926, he entered Arthur Voden, the first year that Arthur Voden opened, and graduated in 1928 with a 2-year commercial course. Ross came from a family of 6 brothers and 4 sisters, and he has one living brother, Dr. J. Galloway. His father was a heavyweight champion of Canada in 1901 and 2. They ran a bakery in St. Thomas. Ross, pleasure to have you here today. It really is great to have this opportunity to talk to you. Before we get into your own boxing career, could you tell me anything about your father's boxing career? That's very interesting. I didn't realize that he...
Well, he was actually a wrestler, and he wrestled for he wrestled the heavyweight champion of the world, who was from Japan, and his name was Yamagama, and he beat everybody in Toronto. And my dad, he went up, they was taking on all comers. And this Yamagama would throw some of these wrestlers out of the ring. And they wouldn't come back. So anyhow, my father went in and he beat Yamagama. And from then on, he entered the championships and he won it.
Boy, that's really something.
Yeah.
Did your father have any influence on you in your interest in getting involved in boxing?
Yes, he did.
Tell us a little bit, how did you get interested in boxing?
Well, my dad, he was teaching Pete Lang to wrestle up at the YMCA. And he would take me along and he'd want us to wrestle too, but I didn't care for the wrestling. And in the next room to the wrestling room was the boxing room. And in that boxing room was Red Melville and Cy Pook and Vince Barry, and Vince wanted a sparring partner, and I started boxing with him. And my dad would say, "Why don't you stick to wrestling?" And I said, "Well, I'd rather box." Well, he said, "If you can box, go ahead and box." So I trained with Vince Barry and Pete Lang and them fellows at the Y. Even Chuck Woolley, we called him the Wild Man, but we boxed all together in the next room. We had at the bottom of in the cellar of the YMCA, there was 4 rooms. One room was wrestling, one room was boxing, one room was weightlifting, and the other room was the football team was doing their inside work.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad wanted me to go into the wrestling, but I'd sneak out of the wrestling room and go into the boxing room.
Yes.
First thing I know, I had the boxing gloves on.
When you were boxing, were you just competing at the local Y, or were you going out and fighting in other spots in St. Thomas or other parts?
No, at that time the lodges would ask wrestlers and boxers to come up and put on a show for their entertainment. And we went to the Talbot Lodge and different lodges, and I would box with 2 or 3 of the different boys, but we were boxing at the Y all the time, so it didn't make any difference. You put on a good show, and the people liked it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vince Barry talked me into going over to London.
This is over to the Armories in London?
Yeah, the Armories in London. Garrison show, that trophy there.
This trophy right here.
That was back in 1929 or 20.
1930.
Yeah.
Ross Galloway, the flyweight champion of Canada, the London Garrison Amateur Athletic Association.
Yeah, well, that's the first prize, or the first time I won the championship. And from then on, I stuck to it. We went to we had a team of boxers and wrestlers. And we went to Queen's University, and we beat them.
This was a team from St. Thomas?
Yeah, a team from St. Thomas, YMCA team.
Yes. Now, did other municipalities have their own Ys have teams too, and you would go and fight these other teams?
Yeah, we go to other old cities.
Yes.
Now, most of the places we went to were armories, because the Second War was over a few years, and everybody boxed in the First War.
Yes.
And they were all, wanting to box again. So we stepped in and boxed against them. And in the scrapbook I got here, we went to Woodstock, London, Brantford, Hamilton, from there every town around had a boxing team.
Mm-hmm.
And we boxed pretty well against every town.
Mm-hmm.
You even went to Simcoe and Tiltonburg.
How would you travel around? Would you travel in a car or travel by train?
We had an old touring car. That's back. I'd say the touring car would be it should be in 1929 or 1930. Vince Barry had a car, and we would all load in the car, and we'd drive to these cities. And we'd leave early because we never knew when the car would break down. and we would have our meal when we got to Brantford or London or whatever city we got to. And then the fights would start around 8 o'clock, and we'd have our dinner maybe at 5 and be all digested by that time.
Yes.
And then we were all ready to go in boxing. Well, of course, we had the wrestlers too. The wrestling went on first, and then the boxing followed it. And I'd say the toughest team we run into was St. Catherine's.
Mm-hmm.
And a fellow by the name of Touch Woods, he was teaching the boys in St. Catherine's. But we always managed to come, when maybe another team would be 7 or 8 of us, and we'd come back with 6 or 7 trophies.
Who would pay your expenses, like to go on these trips? Would this all come out of your own pockets?
No. When we had like Cy Pook would be the managing the team, or Pete Lang, and they would go to the fellows that run this show, and he'd collect the expenses.
I see.
Now the expenses would be, instead of a car fare, we all our train fare, we all were in the car. But they paid us what a railroad ticket would cost.
I see.
So we made maybe $5 or $6 off it.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd always have a good meal on it before we went in.
What made the boxers and the wrestlers in St. Thomas so successful? Because when you look back, and we're going to talk more about your own career, but when you look back at some of these, Cy Pook and Vince Barry and Jim Melville and Chuck Woolley, we had some really successful boxers. Was it good training, or what? Something was there that made us so successful.
Well, we had good trainers. Cy Pook went to Detroit to fight a lot, and he trained in Detroit. And we run into a fellow by the name of Scotty McDougall, and he run the fights in Detroit. And whenever he was stuck for fighters, he called Vince Barry or Red Melville or one of them fellows, and then we'd go up to Detroit and fight in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
It was all amateur stuff.
Yes.
But there was no big money in it.
No. Well, there was another local name that I've heard of who's a good trainer, Barney Barnes?
Barney Barnes was...
is that Ron Barnes' father?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
He trained, he'd done a lot of training. He was like the English type boxing, all science, no knockout punches in, in England, it was a sport where it was all done by points. And in the United States, like Detroit or Buffalo, where we went, there was a lot of knockouts. But Barney Burns was a good trainer. Mm-hmm. But he was the English type. And we had 2 or 3 fellows like that. We had Cy Pook, and he was training all the time. And we'd go up there and train with him. Mm-hmm. And of course at that time the Depression was in, and there was nothing to do. And we only paid $5 a year for the YMCA, and we went to the YMCA any time of any day.
Yes.
And there would always be somebody, and they always had in there was a punching bag and a heavy bag and different things to train with. Mm-hmm. And then a little earlier than that, John Peck was a school teacher at the collegiate and in the Arthur Woden School, physical training teacher, and he started boxing. Or he started his boxing there. Yeah. And of course he didn't know much about the game, but he had a book, and he would show us what the book mm-hmm. was teaching him, and we had a lot of fun. One time he says, I never forget this, he said to one of you fellows volunteered to go on with me? So Vince Barry says, sure, I'll go on. He knocked poor old John Peck down.
I know that you all, the group of you, that you traveled a lot together, but amongst you, who do you think was the best boxer?
Well,
I'm sure you might be biased and say yourself, but
no. I would say, actually, outside of some bad faults. Vince Berry knew the game well, but he also knew the dirty parts of it too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, see, boxing was a left jab. You'd jab your hand out like that, and Vince was the kind of a guy, if he missed it, he'd come back on the elbow.
Oh.
And Vince was smart.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew all the tricks of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like Cy Pook, he was a good trainer too. In fact, he trained me, and managed me too. And he wouldn't go for that dirty stuff.
No.
But see, it was in the game.
And I suppose as a boxer, you had to contend with that with the other boxers.
Oh yeah, sure.
That you were up against too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And you run. The more trouble we had was with the fellows that had been in the war, and they still could box a little bit.
Yes.
And they were clean boxers, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some real good boxers in Ontario. And we had 2 or 3 boys that I boxed with. Now, Lefty Gwynn, he won the gold medal in the Olympic Games.
We'll come to him in a bit. Now, when you were 18 years old, 1926, the boxing commissioner, Fred Norbert, entered you into the Ontario boxing circuit, and you won the Southwestern Ontario Championship and received a gold medal. And then in the fall of 1928, you won the gold medal, and then you went to Montreal for the Eastern Championships.
Yeah.
Was that the first time in 1928 that you were awarded any awards?
No, 1920 and 1929 and 30. No, 1930 was a big year for me.
Well, 30 was when you won the
British.
In 1930, you won the Ontario and Dominion flyweight championships.
That's right.
And you had also, but in 1929, you had also won the Ontario flyweight championship too.
Yeah.
And that's when you beat Lefty Gwynn.
I beat Lefty Gwynn 2 or 3 times, and we boxed quite often.
Mm-hmm.
And Lefty and I were friends, you know.
Were you?
Oh yeah.
Where was he from?
Toronto.
Toronto?
Yeah. In fact, he was working for the city of Toronto as recreation director.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, Lefty and I trained together, and I knew Lefty, you know, what Lefty could do and what he couldn't do.
Yes.
And that helped me beat him.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got hurt and he went in my place, why, he was a fighter, but he was what you would call a real good heavy puncher.
Yes.
But like when I boxed with him, I stayed away from. I knew what part of the what punches to make him miss me with,
mm-hmm.
and I was able to beat him that way.
Did you traveling the circuit boxing? Did you get to know a lot of the fighters?
Oh yeah. I knew. We had a fellow. In fact, he come to St. Thomas and worked out with me. You know, Chuck Butters, and he was one of the top boxers, but I don't think he ever won a championship. But he was a good boxer,
mm-hmm.
and he worked at the old at the foundry at the east end of town.
Oh, at the Canada Iron Foundry.
Canada Iron Foundry.
Yes.
Yeah, he was a hockey player too. He tended gold for the foundry hockey team.
Mm-hmm.
And that was along the same time, 1930-31.
Yes. Now, in 1930, when you won the Dominion flyweight championship, where were those fights held?
They were held in Hamilton.
In Hamilton.
Yep. And then, see, because they were going to have the British Empire games there too, and that way they brought them up. They brought all the division champions together in Hamilton,
mm-hmm.
and we boxed, and I won that.
So you won the Dominion Championship in 1930, and also in 30 You competed in the British Empire Games,
Yeah.
and you received the bronze medal?
Yeah, that's it right there. Well, no, the bronze medal. Oh,
Up on the wall there.
The British Empire game, and this is the plaque they give us.
Mm-hmm.
Gold and silver open.
Yes.
Gold, a gold one, silver one, and the bronze one.
Mm-hmm.
And I placed third place.
The other two fighters that won the gold and the silver, did they go on and amount to anything later, or?
No, Tommy Pardo kept in touch with me. He was the Englishman that won the gold medal.
Yes.
And he kept in touch with me, and he turned professional, and he boxed against Emo Pladner, who was boxing. He was a.
Oh, we're just. We lost your mic. We lost your microphone there,
Oh.
Ross. Here we go. There we go.
No.
Now you were talking. So you stayed in touch with the gentleman that won the gold medal,
Yeah,
Tommy.
I kept in touch with him. His name was Tommy Pardo, and I kept in touch with the South Africa boy,
Mm-hmm.
and he come over to the United States, and he turned pro, and he only wrote me a letter that he was coming, and that was all that I heard from him.
Yes.
But Pardo kept in touch with me.
Now you went to Winnipeg in 1930, also.
Yeah,
And that was for the Western Championships?
yeah.
Yeah. When you went to Winnipeg, who paid your expenses to go out to Winnipeg?
The police association. They had the Winnipeg Police Association, and they run the amateur fights there because Earl McCready was their president, and he was the chief of police in Winnipeg, and he was an old-time wrestler, heavyweight wrestler, and he put on the fights and the wrestling shows.
I see.
Yeah.
Who else went out to Winnipeg from St. Thomas? Anybody?
Vince Barry.
Vince did?
Yeah, Vince went, and there was, I believe Chuck Woolley went too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not positive now about Chuck, but he went out. But it seems to me Chuck was a swinger, and I think he lost on the fall. Now I'm not sure of that,
Mm-hmm.
but he lost out. And Vince went up to the semifinals, and then he got beat out in the finals.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these trophies that you have here in your room, these were from different amateur fights that you
Yeah.
fought in?
Yeah, well, see, the Army, or the London Garrison run shows, and Brantford Army run shows. St. Catharines, I think that was the Lions Club run that show.
Yes.
And Woodstock Armories run a couple shows too.
Mm-hmm.
And that, one of them trophies, I think, come from Woodstock.
And this photograph here, this is you in your fighting days?
Yeah, that was me in my fighting days. 112 pounds. I weighed around 110. I never had any trouble with my weight.
You didn't?
No.
No, a lot of people would.
Yeah, yeah. Then I went up to 118 pounds. Well, I got a little heavier. And then I boxed at bantamweight, 118 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And Vince Berry was fighting 118 at that class. But then he got heavier, and he went to the 125 pound, 126 pound class.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then in 1930, you turned professional, and you went to the United States and boxed under the name of Johnny Ross.
Yeah, well, I went there because this Scotty McDougall, I think
He was the trainer from Detroit.
Yeah.
Yes.
and he gave us a different name. See, he gave us a different name. We just boxed as preliminary boys, and they paid us $10 a round. Like we'd fight 4 rounds, $40.
Well, that's pretty good money.
That was good money in the Depression.
I'll say.
Yeah, we always had a few dollars in our pocket.
Now, who else was when you were in this circuit? Was there anybody else from St. Thomas with you?
Yeah, Chuck Woolley.
Chuck Woolley was also.
Yeah, Vince never went there.
No.
No, he never went there. But Chuck did, and I think Bumps Wright did once. But when Scotty needed a fighter, he always phoned either Vince or myself. Of course, everybody didn't have a phone then. That was part of the reason why they phoned. We had a phone in the bake shop, and he phoned me quite often for it.
And so what would you do? Would you hop on a train and go to Detroit? And
sometimes you went on a train, and if Vince was going, why, he'd go to see the fights. We rode in his car.
Did you?
Yeah, he had a car. Yeah. In fact, I can still see when we run on the wrestling and boxing shows in the little towns, we tied the wrestling mats on the side of the car. We never got stopped by the police neither.
No?
But we had the big wrestling mats. But it was amateur wrestling.
Yes.
So, yeah. There was no.
Well, that must have been quite a ride going to Detroit by car in 1930.
Oh, yeah, it was. We got stopped at the border a couple of times, too.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. We had to phone Scotty McDougall, and no, his name was Monteith. I don't know why I call him McDougall. Scotty Monteith. We'd have to call him, and they'd come down and get us.
How come they would stop? How come you were stopped at the border?
Because we had, not proper
identification.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure you weren't taking any illegal alcohol into the United States at that time.
We never touched that stuff. That's one thing we never touched, or at least I never. Anyway. Yeah. And I never seen any of the boys till I got hurt. And then
yes. Now, where did you travel in the United States boxing? Just in the Detroit area?
Yeah, just in the Detroit area. Ypsilanti. I can remember Ypsilanti, Lansing, and there was a St. Thomas boy there boxing, and he was a Michigan State champ. But I can't remember his name now.
Really?
And he married Bus Laux' sister, it seems to me. He married a St. Thomas girl. And of course we were close. Like everybody knew each other then.
Yes.
And like boxing and wrestling. And boxing and wrestling seemed to go together all the time. But it did in St. Thomas too.
In St. Thomas, where else were you boxing besides the Y? Were you boxing in wrestling in the Granite Arena over on Metcalf Street too?
Yeah. Boxing and wrestling there. And at first when we went there, Bernie McIntyre was running the old Granite Arena. Well, then he sold it. I think he died, and then they sold it to a Ukrainian fellow. He was, and he let us run the fights there.
Did you make any money running those fights too, or?
Well, Chuck Woolley run the fights mostly, and Vince Berry, and they made a little bit of money, but we never made anything.
No. In 1932, you were the Olympic Games were held in Los Angeles, and you were going to be going to try and compete to get on the boxing team.
Yeah, it's either what they call the Olympic trials. The Olympic trials was to be held in Toronto, and I was chumming around with a couple of fellows from St. Thomas, Crud Neal, maybe Crudder's Neal and George Neal, and they said, well, if you're just going to Toronto, why not hitchhike? I said, oh, I can't do that. They're sending us a railroad ticket. So anyhow, these fellows were training at the YMCA, and they said, let's hitchhike down. So we did. And we run into a guy that was drinking. and he ran head on into a car and made the top of my head off.
Oh.
I went through the windshield. See, I was sitting in the front seat.
Mm-hmm.
And that scar, I don't know if you can still...
Yes.
Took 48 stitches to sew it up.
Boy, oh boy. So that ended your boxing career.
No, not right away. Well, actually, yes. I couldn't do any.
Just before we leave that, so if you had been successful going to Toronto, you would have been fighting
Lefty Gwynn.
Lefty Gwynn.
Yeah.
And you had already defeated Lefty Gwynn in the past.
Yeah, 3 or 4 times.
So it's quite possible that if you had beat him there, or had qualified for the team, and he ended up winning the gold medal in the 32 Olympics, didn't he?
That's right. Yep, that's right. But it could have been, either way.
Mm-hmm.
Because Lefty and I boxed together, and we knew each other. Now he may have beat me, but I always beat him.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think I lost 1 decision to him. I'm not positive, but I think it was only once that I ever lost to him. But I beat him at least 2 or 3 times. It's in the book,
yes.
In the scrapbook there.
Now, but you say though that the accident didn't end your boxing career then?
Yes, it did for.
Till things healed up.
Yeah, that healed up, and that was over a year. But then, if I got hit in the head, the nerves would give me a terrific headaches.
Yes.
So then I started, I found out I better stay out of the boxing for a while,
mm-hmm.
and I started to referee the wrestling. And then they brought the professional wrestlers into the Granite Arena. Joe Meach was a promoter, and he promoted it with the Lions Club in St. Thomas. And he talked me into refereeing. So I refereed in St. Thomas 2 or 3 shows. Next thing I knew, I had people at bake shop wanting me to go and referee at different places.
Mm-hmm.
So I did.
I'm sure you've seen the professional wrestling on TV today, the Hulk Hogan's and all those guys. Is there a lot of difference from the professional wrestling today to the professional wrestling that you refereed back in the 1930s?
No, not very much difference, but
no?
They were all in terrific shape, very good shape, and they could wrestle. Earl McCready and Vern Gagne and Lord Leighton, Whipper Watson, but they were all amateurs at one time, and they turned pro and become professionals. And Pete, the guy that was promoting, Joe Meach and Pete Meach, they were boxers actually, but then they started the wrestling, and they promoted the wrestling. They promoted it in St. Thomas, all across Western Ontario, and then they went over the United States a few times, and they worked for Harry Light. Harry Light was promoter in Detroit. He owned the Detroiter Hotel, and we went to Buffalo a few times, and Hugh Shannon, he owned a big hotel in Buffalo, and he was promoter in Buffalo. That was back in the 30s and 32s. And they had some top-notch wrestlers. They had Primo Carnero was wrestling. He was a boxer, but he wrestled.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Whipper Watson was the top. And Watson come down to Vince's place 2 or 3 times and stayed there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, we had a couple of big reunions at Vince's place, and Lord Leighton, and Bibber McCoy, and these fellows would come, and they thought Vince had a wonderful house. Well, he did.
Yes.
He had a wonderful place, and they loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I can still remember Vince took them and all the fellows to the old athletic park where they played ball down there. That is back in the 30s, and Watson. No, Jack Dempsey was with us then. Jack Dempsey and Watson and Jack Dempsey was refereeing the wrestling then, and he said it was a natural amphitheater, the athletic park. He said if that was in the United States, they'd build
bleachers
up
the
the sides, but they never did. But he told them, he said that was in the United States, and it'd be a money-making thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we should look at that again.
Yeah,
still,
maybe it wouldn't hurt. But it's changed a lot.
Yeah. Man. Now, did you get to meet a lot of, like you talked, Jack Dempsey? Did you get to meet a lot of the big boxing names over the years?
Yeah, yeah. Joe Louis. I went to see Joe Louis 3 or 4 times, and he boxed in Detroit, and he trained in Detroit. Well, he had a club of amateur wrestlers. He brought, you talk about walkers, about Sugar Ray Robinson coming here, and he boxed against Byrne.
Yeah, who did he box against? Byrne Brown.
Yeah. Byrne Brown was boxing around the Y, and of course, Sugar Ray knocked him out. It should never been matched that way.
No,
it's never been, because there was a boy that, well, he was world's champion.
Mm-hmm.
And it destroyed Brown.
Did it?
I don't think he ever boxed anymore after that. Now, he may have, but I don't think he did. But
well, at least he could say he retired from the boxing ring after being knocked out by Sugar Ray Robinson.
Yeah. His name was Walker Smith.
Walker Smith, he called himself.
Walker Smith, yeah. His right name was Walker Smith,
yeah. Now, you taught for a while. You taught boxing at Arthur Bowden and also at the Y?
Yeah, I was teaching at the Y, and then I was taught at the Arthur Bowden School. And we went against the Sarnia team and beat them. And I remember the principal wrote Mr. Cavanaugh a letter and told him that the people I had were all professionals. Well, they were all only school kids. But of course, he was complaining. But Mr. Cavanaugh called me in and he talked, and he showed me the letter and told me. And I said, well, none of them were professionals, not even me. I'd had a few professional fights, but we weren't making our living out of it.
No.
In fact, I was working in the bake shop every night. Even when I went boxing, when I come home, I had to go in the bake shop.
Where was the bake shop on Talbot Street?
No, it was on Hiawatha Street.
Oh, on Hiawatha Street?
23 Hiawatha Street. When my father died, my mother, she sold it to Turville, electrician. And I think
it's a variety store now.
Yeah.
Right at the corner of the northeast corner of Hiawatha and Curtis.
Curtis, yeah. Well, the next house was 23, and that was our house.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the bake shop behind it.
So you lived, and Watermans were Estelle and Charlie Waterman.
Charlie Waterman worked he was a detective.
On the railway,
Yeah,
yes.
on the railroad, yeah. Charlie Waterman. He was a nice guy, too.
Yeah. So your family was in the bake business there for many years until your father passed away then.
Yeah, well, see, his father was in the bakery in Toronto, and he started looking around after he finished wrestling and that. He was looking around, and the war had broke out, so he was offered a job at Beatty's bake shop. It was on Talbot Street in Curtis. So he come down as a foreman at Beatty's bake shop, and then he started his own bakery up.
Mm-hmm.
And he bought that house on Hiawatha Street, and he just built a shop on the back of it.
I see.
And Waterman's lived the second house past like Curtis Street.
Mm-hmm.
Waterman's lived in the next house, Charlie Waterman.
In 1939, with the outbreak of the Second War, you enlisted and joined the Navy. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I was traveling barnstorming. I couldn't show you the pictures, but we had 2 or 3 wrestlers, and we had, I was boxing, and we were taking on all comers. And if they could stay 5 rounds, we paid them. If they couldn't, which we knocked them out. Most of them were guys that thought they were fighters, and they been drinking and all that, and they come up because there wasn't much to knocking them off.
Mm-hmm.
But then we had a good outside man, like maybe remember Jack Shepherd?
No.
Well, his father, he was a mounted policeman before that, or after that. And he would be the outside man. He'd come up and challenge. And him and I had boxed together.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like, we weren't killing each other, but we, eventually he would have, Jack would quit, and
mm-hmm.
but we still paid him.
Now, you were a baker in the Navy too?
Yeah.
Yes?
I joined the Navy as a baker, and then they taught me into cooking.
Mm-hmm. Now, where were you stationed while you were served in the Navy?
Halifax, and then I went on the HMCS Prince David. That was made into a cruiser, and we hit the convoys. We picked up maybe 40 or 50 tankers in the West Indies, and we would escort them to England.
Mm-hmm.
But we had 3 or 4 destroyers with us, and 2 or 3 corvettes.
And you served with the Navy until the end of the war?
Yep. I changed from the Prince Henry or the Prince David to the Prince Henry, the same kind of ship.
Mm-hmm.
But I went I took a couple of courses in the Navy, and they made me a chief cook, chief petty
really?
officer. Yeah.
Boy. Now, all throughout the war, were you still wrestling and boxing, or did you?
I boxed in the Navy.
In the Navy, yes.
Yeah,
You still were all through your service.
Yeah, most of the time though, when we weren't in Halifax. In Halifax, they had a boxing team, and I was on it. But when I was away at sea, why I wouldn't be going with them.
No.
But we boxed on the ship among ourselves, and we always had little, like 2 or 3 rounds each.
Mm-hmm.
It was entertainment for the crew.
Oh, I'm sure it would be.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So when the war ended in 1945, you went to work down at the psychiatric hospital?
I come home. My father had died, see.
During while you were away?
Yeah. Well, they sent me home.
Oh, did they?
For his funeral, and then I had to go back. But when I come back, you were supposed to get the job you had. The government said the employee had to rehire you. But when I come back, I had to go and tell him, my father run the bakery and he's dead. So they said, well, we'll see if we can find you a job. So they said, there's 2 openings for bakers. One in the psychiatric hospital, which had just been built, and the other one was at Westminster. Well, at that time I didn't have a car.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, I'll take the one in St. Thomas if they'll accept me. So I went out to see Ken Patton was the administrator out there, and he hired me right away.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you worked out there until you retired?
I worked out there until I retired.
And you were actually the chief cook out there, were you not?
Well, I turned, when they found out that I had taken these courses in cooking, they asked me if I wanted to take another course at George Brown. In fact...
We had to take that off the wall, I saw that. It's, because we didn't want him to knock it down with this camera. But I saw that award.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I went to George Brown's College, and they made me the chief cook at the psychiatric. So I'd done 29 years in the psychiatric hospital, but I had 6 years wartime.
Mm-hmm.
So they give me the wartime they got my pension.
Oh, really?
So that gave me 35 years on on the Ontario government pension board.
Yes.
And I got 35 years was the highest pension you could get.
I see.
So I retired then.
In 1988, you were elected to the Canadian Boxing Hall of Fame. How did that election come about? Did somebody nominate you to be elected, or did they just call you up out of the blue and say that we want to induct you in the Hall of Fame?
No, I boxed so often in Toronto and that, and there was one fellow who was elected president, and I went down and trained with different, the flyweights were top notch in Toronto, but they were always looking for sparring partners, and I always went down, when I had the chance, I'd go to Toronto and I would spar with some of them guys. And this one fellow that was president of the Unitas, Tony Unitas, he was the president of it, of the Hall of Fame, and he said, I'm going to nominate you for the Hall of Fame. I said, oh, it don't matter, Tony, it's a joke to me then. And so years slipped by, and next thing I knew, he sent me a letter. I think the letter's in that scrapbook, that he recommended me to be put in the Hall of Fame.
That's a real honor.
Yeah.
It really and truly is.
Yeah, it is. And I went down there, and they give me the time of my life.
That's really something.
Yeah.
And I think that, and going along with your plans of donating all these trophies to Arthur Voden, because you were a former student there, and that they can set up a little trophy case with your trophies and your awards. And I know I've had the opportunity to see your scrapbooks over the years, and you've done a fabulous job of preserving your own record in boxing. It's really fabulous that they all exist. But you also have other interests too. You're interested in horses too?
Well, when I come home from the war, in the war, not working at the psychiatric hospital, I went to the Y 2 or 3 times, and I was teaching boxing there. And then there's a fellow who lived across the road from me. He's on the fire department in St. Thomas, and he had a couple of ponies, and he was having a little trouble with them. Well, we had horses on our bread wagons when we run the bakery, so I went over a few times and helped them, and then first thing I knew, I was driving his horses all the time. So he was on the fire department, and he said to me, well, what about, how would you like to buy them horses? So I bought them and went in showing horses myself. And with them 2 horses, they come from Burdane's, Ivan Burdane, and I think he's a captain.
Yes, he is.
And he sold them horses to me, and after I got them, they they were grand champion at the Royal Winter Fair 2 or 3 times.
Holy cow!
Yeah. So
you've been successful with horses like you were in boxing.
Yeah. Well, you have to stick to it. That's what I found. If you can't do it for one night a week or 2 nights, you got to have a steady. You got to train them. And them horses knew me, after a year or 2.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. Have you been active in the Masonic Lodge over the years too?
Well, I belonged to Masonic Lodge. I joined when I was boxing. Sai Puk was a master in 302.
Yes.
And I joined 546.
Joined Talbot Lodge. I see.
Yeah, the Talbot Lodge. But now, after I become the life member, after 25 years, they made me a life member, and I don't go very often.
I see.
But Pearl is talking me into going back to it.
Good.
She says, you got to go back to it. So I was talking to a couple of them, and I'm going to start back.
Good. This ring you have on here, this was awarded to you when you were inducted in the Hall of Fame?
Yep. That and
the award up on the wall here?
Yep. Yeah, there's
and a trophy too.
Yep.
Hall of Fame. What does that mean, the max?
It's the last trophy you can get.
Oh. I see. Now, over the years in boxing, did you have many injuries, broken bones, things like that?
No, just cut eyes, split on. You can see the scar tissue on my eyes.
Oh yes, I can see a bit of cauliflower ears too.
Yeah, cauliflower ears. Both of them are cauliflowers.
Yeah.
But I can remember Vince and I. We come home together, you know. We always had to stop at Dr. Bristol.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the corner of Pearl.
Right by the art gallery.
Yeah.
There. Yes.
And we'd go in there and he'd sew them up for us.
Your nose? How many times was your nose broken?
Oh, half a dozen times,
yeah.
I guess. It's pretty well bruised up, but in the winter time, you have a hard time, breathing at times.
Any other? Did you ever break your hands or anything?
No,
your wrist?
No. I never had any trouble with my hands.
Yeah.
The only trouble I got now is with my knees. My knees, the arthritis is so bad in my knees, and I'm going to a doctor's now. Mm-hmm. And one doctor thinks I should have plastic knees.
Oh, really?
But I went to I want
second opinion.
Yeah, and I went to this doctor, and he said, we'll try to remove the inflammation. Mm-hmm. And he said, how did you ever get these ligaments all tore? Well, I said, when I was refereeing the wrestling bouts, some of them guys would jump off the top ropes and land on me. Mm-hmm. And I said, my knees took it.
Yeah.
Knocked you down.
Yes.
Sometimes your knees would be twisted backwards.
Any regrets looking back at your boxing career?
No, I'd do it over again.
You would you?
Yeah. But I would, I think I would just stay in the amateurs.
You would?
Yeah, as an amateur. I wouldn't want to be in the professionals.
Mm-hmm.
When I say that, because I run into so many of them, like at our last Hall of Fame meeting I went to last year, we had, in fact, there's a letter in there. This fellow used the language they used in jail. He was doing a life sentence. He got in jail for something. Mm-hmm. Carter. His name was Carter. Hurricane
Carter. I've heard of him.
Yeah, Hurricane Carter was the speaker. He was the speaker at our Hall of Fame last year. Mm-hmm. So he used some of the words that they used in the jail, mm-hmm. and the police, or the penitentiary where he was. And when he got out, they asked him to be a speaker, but they never dreamt he was going to use that kind of language. Yes. So Tony Unitas wrote the letters on the page, on one of them books.
One of your scrapbooks?
Yeah. And apologizing for the language he used, because we took our wives and our
mm-hmm.
girlfriends there, and them, that kind of language wouldn't go.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time, Ross. I'd really like to thank you for the opportunity to have sat and interviewed you today. It's been very informative, and you're very much part of the history of St. Thomas. And on behalf of the citizens, just like to really thank you for the contributions that you've made over the years, and wish you all the best in the years to come. And thank you very much for being my guest today.
I'm proud of it.
Well, we're proud of you too. Yeah. I'd just like to wrap up this edition of Local History. We haven't had any local history shows in a couple of years, but Ross has kind of given me some inspiration today, and I think if any of the viewers have any ideas of interesting subjects that they feel should be interviewed, that have made a contribution to the history of St. Thomas, I'd very much like to hear from them, and they can contact Allview Cable or contact my office at City Hall. My guest today has been Ross Galloway, and we've been discussing his early boxing career in St. Thomas. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you to the staff at All View 8 for their work in setting up today's program. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a nice day.